In my town, there's an old tale about the Bardow Witch, though calling it a legend might be stretching it. Nobody outside of Bardow has even heard of her. Not surprising since folks here rarely leave, and outsiders never visit. It's the kind of place where you're born, you live, and you die, often sooner than you'd think. There's been more funerals than births in Bardow for as long as I can remember, but I'll get to that. We're tucked away in the Appalachian Mountains, once a bustling coal mining town. There are some trails off the main Appalachian path that lead here, but they're overgrown and forgotten, barely marked. On one of those trails, about 30 feet into the woods, there's a cave entrance in the side of a steep cliff. It's not one of the old mine shafts. Those were all sealed up long ago. Still, it must connect to them somehow because there's always a faint whiff of burning coal in the air. That's where folks say the witch lives. The stories vary. Some claim she was a native girl who died of sickness when the settlers arrived. Others think she was an enslaved woman who almost made it to freedom but got shot just before crossing the border. Another version says she was a local girl from a coal mining family, beloved by her parents, but cast out when they found out she was pregnant. Left to die in the woods by the very people who once cared for her. We don't know exactly who she was, but there's one thing we all agree on. She was young, tied deeply to this place, and had every reason to despise the people who live here. And here's the kicker. This isn't just some campfire story. The witch is real. Or something is. Girls disappear. Every few years, one goes missing. Sometimes they've just run off, looking for a better life. But other times, they turn up. I've never seen it myself, thank God, but I've heard enough. When they're found, the bodies are torn apart. Blood everywhere. And pieces are always missing. An ear, a few toes, maybe a bone. Nobody knows what she does with them. Last year, it was my best and only friend, Rachel Dean. Rachel was bullied for as long as I'd known her, mostly by the same kids who tormented me. I kept my head down, but Rachel? She fought back every time, even when she knew she'd lose. Once, after some jerk broke her nose, I asked her why she didn't just let it go. She wiped the blood away, gave me that sly grin of hers and said, "Because one day, I'll get them, Sarah. One day, I'll catch them off guard." A week later, what was left of her washed up in a stream. They said it was a bear. It's always a bear. But nobody in Bardow really believes that. What kind of bear kills someone, tears them to shreds, and only takes a couple of pieces? Nobody's going to investigate, either. We're not important enough for anyone to care. And there's a pattern, too. Before every disappearance, something terrible happens. When Rachel died, it was a storm that wrecked half the school. Another time, a family fell off a cliff. There was a landslide once that took out a road, and a handful of cars with it. The worst was when a fire broke out in the mines. They couldn't stop it, and dozens of people died. That fire still burns underground today, poisoning the air and water. They shut down the mines to smother it, but it didn't work. No one's come to tell us if it's safe to stay here, but we all know it's not. When the mines closed, most people packed up and left. The rest of us? We're still here, scraping by, choking on smoke, trying to pretend this place isn't killing us. My dad's one of the deadbeats who stuck around. So here I am, finishing high school in a half-ruined building. In theory, I graduate this year. In reality, well, we'll see. I've never had dreams of leaving. School's not my thing, and I don't have any big plans. But my little sister, Megan, she's different. She's smart and determined, and I'll do whatever it takes to get her out of here. Every penny I've made working at the grocery store, pitiful as it is, has gone into savings for her college. It's a hell of a lot more than my father's ever contributed. Our dad is useless. Always has been. He hops from one crappy job to another, blowing every cent he earns on booze. If we didn't have my grandparents' old house, we'd be homeless. That's Bardow for you. It's a place you can't escape, even when it's falling apart around you. Also, my dad killed my mom, not in any official sense. She just disappeared one day. Not because of the witch. She was too old for that, and her body never showed up. According to my dad and the police, she just up and left. But she wouldn't have. Not without me and Megan. There's no way she'd leave her girls behind to deal with his yelling, his threats, and his rampages. I know it. And that smug grin on his face when he told me she wasn't coming home? Yeah, it was him. But anyway, after Rachel died, I started wandering the woods. The official advice was to stay far away, to never walk the paths alone, in case you ran into the wild animal that had killed her. For me, though, the woods felt different. The town, and everything outside of it, was cold and cruel. But in the forest, I felt warm and safe. The trees, the vines, the roots, they seemed to welcome me, to pull me into something bigger than myself. Out there, I was alone. And here, I belonged. Even in winter, when the frost froze everything solid and the green faded away, I felt calm in those woods. The silence, the stillness, it gave me strength. I'd walk the icy paths and look up at the bare branches clawing at the sky, their spindly fingers reaching for something they'd never catch. Watching them fight against the cold made me wish I could be that brave. Whenever I passed the cave that people said was the witch's lair, I'd quicken my step and avoid looking at it. But not too long ago, I stopped and stared. The opening seemed to stretch wider and darker the longer I looked. It felt like it was pulling at me, like it wanted me to step off the path and go inside. And I swear to you, I saw it. A hand. It was huge and pale, almost glowing, with long, bony fingers that ended in razor-sharp nails. It crept out of the shadows, clicking its claws against the rock. Then, something moved deeper in the darkness. I opened my mouth to scream, but before I could, someone slammed into me and knocked me to the ground. Thinking about joining the old hag, Whitaker, sneered Jason. He loomed over me, grinning, and behind him were a couple of his buddies. There weren't as many as usual. The storm had claimed 2 of them, but there were still enough to make me nervous. There's, I started to say, looking back at the cave to point out the hand, but it was gone. Just some dead vines hanging over the rocks now, swaying slightly in the cold breeze. Jason laughed. Wait, you don't actually believe that crap, do you? His friends chuckled, too, but I caught a couple of them glancing uneasily toward the cave. Of course not, I snapped, brushing dirt off my jeans. I'm not stupid. Prove it, Jason said, his smirk growing wider. Go take a look. The way he was looking at me reminded me so much of my dad when he was drunk and jeering that I almost punched him right then and there. Sure, I said with a forced laugh. No problem. It was one of the dumbest things I've ever said, but I didn't care. I just had another blowout with my dad, and it ended the same way it always did, with him laughing in my face and kicking me out of the house. I wasn't about to let someone else treat me the same way. Not Jason. Not anyone. Jason and his crew started whispering and snickering behind me, but I ignored them and headed for the cave. The moment I stepped off the trail, the world went silent. I couldn't hear Jason or his friends anymore. Even the wind seemed to stop. The bare branches overhead shouldn't have blocked much light, but somehow it was darker here. So dark I could barely see where I was going. Still, I kept moving. Got it. Here's the revision with Whitaker replacing Burton. The opening was a lot bigger than it looked from the trail, at least twice my height and just as wide. I was only a couple of feet away, but I couldn't see a thing inside. My eyes drifted to the left, where I'd seen that hand before, but there was still nothing. I glanced back at Jason and his crew, still standing there watching, though I couldn't make out their faces. No way out now. I turned to face the cave and stepped into the darkness. 1 step, then 2, then 3, and just like that, all the light disappeared. I couldn't see a thing. The air inside was warm, too warm, and the smell of coal was overpowering, thick enough to choke on. I stretched both hands out in front of me, slowly. Nothing. Just empty air. Could Jason and the others still see me? How far was I supposed to go? Maybe I could just stand here for a minute, then walk out and tell them. That's when I felt it. Fingertips brushed against my palms, soft at first, then pressing forward as hands intertwined their fingers with mine. I yanked back and hit the ground hard, scrambling to get away. I clawed my way to my feet and bolted, sprinting toward what I prayed was the way out. I didn't stop running until I hit the trail, tripping and crashing onto the ground again. Only then did I realize I'd been screaming the entire time. Jason and his friends were rolling on the ground too, but from laughter. They were roaring like it was the funniest thing they'd ever seen. Jason was clutching his stomach, doubled over. I got up and dusted myself off, muttering, "Screw you." Jason stood, still laughing. "Man, I've never seen anyone run that fast before. What did you last in there, like 2 seconds?" "Guess so," I said. "Let's see if you can make it 3. That'd be a personal record for you, right?" I flicked my eyes toward his girlfriend, Tara, just for a second. One of Jason's friends snickered at that, and his grin wavered. I savored that moment. "Shut your damn mouth," Jason snapped. "What's the problem? Scared? You're the big man, right? Go ahead, show us how it's done." Jason's smirk returned. "I don't have to prove anything to you, Whitaker. But thanks for the laugh. I've been bored out of my mind ever since your little buddy Rachel turned up in that creek. I don't remember deciding to punch him. I just did. When the red haze lifted, my knuckles stung, and Jason was on the ground, stunned. One day," I said, breathing hard, "one day, you'll get what's coming to you." I turned and stormed off, heading home. I half expected one of his buddies to chase after me to defend their leader, but none of them moved. The next afternoon, I was sitting at the dining table, patching up my jeans where they'd torn during my fall. My dad was snoring in his recliner, dead to the world as usual. I'd done my best to push the cave out of my mind, to focus on my responsibilities. I had work, school, and Megan to think about. I couldn't afford to fall apart over some weird things I thought I'd seen or felt. The screen door slammed open, and Megan burst in, grinning from ear to ear. "Guess what?" "Shoo," I hissed, whipping my head toward the living room. Thankfully, Dad kept snoring. Megan's smile faltered, and she looked sheepish. "Sorry," she whispered. "It's fine," I said, lowering my voice. "What's up?" "I got my scores," she said, waving a piece of paper in my face. She must have printed it at the library, the only place in town with halfway decent internet. Her SAT results. She'd been so nervous, studying like crazy. A 740 in reading and writing, and a 750 in math. "Holy crap, Megan. You're a genius." I jumped up and hugged her tight. "It's not the real thing," she said when I let go. "The real test is next year, and this doesn't even matter that much." "It matters a lot. Between this and your grades, you're getting out of here for sure." Her smile dimmed. "I don't want to leave you behind. Don't worry about me. I'll figure something out." "But the money." "I'll figure it out," I said. "You hungry? Want some dinner?" Megan looked like she wanted to argue, but she didn't. She just nodded and sat down to start on her homework. There wasn't much in the kitchen. A box of stale pasta, some butter, a couple of eggs. I took what I could from work, but that wasn't much lately. The manager had been watching me. Starting to suspect, probably. I threw together what I could and hoped it'd be edible. I dumped the mess of a meal into 3 bowls, transferring one to the fridge for whenever Dad woke from his stupor. I picked up mine and Megan's bowls and headed for the dining room, and one of the bowls slipped from my fingers, shattering on the ground. Dad awoke from his drunken slumber, leaping from his chair and storming over so that he towered over me, his face inches from mine. "The hell do you think you're doing?" he growled. "It was an accident," Megan said. "Quiet, you!" he barked, and Megan shrank back in her seat. He turned back to me, waiting for an answer. "Making dinner. Why the hell is it on the floor?" I dropped it. He grabbed me by the collar of my shirt and slammed me into the wall. I groaned, the blow reigniting the pain from yesterday's encounter with Jason. "Stop!" cried Megan. He ignored her this time, smacking me over the head. He aimed another slap, but I ducked under his arm and pulled myself from his grasp. Dad spun to follow me, but he lost his balance and crashed to the floor. I grabbed Megan by the arm and pulled her from the house. Dad was shouting after us, trying to pull himself up, but I was sure he was too drunk to make a real effort to follow. Tears streamed down my sister's face. I was still too numb to react. I just kept us walking. "It's okay," I said. "We'll circle the block, and by the time we're back, he'll be out again. I'll clean up, and you can finish your work." "I'm sorry," said Megan. "I should have stopped him." "You don't need to defend me. I can handle him. It's not fair that he only goes after you." "I'll be fine. I can't leave you here alone with him." "Don't be stupid. You're going to college, and that's it. We were quiet for the rest of the walk. Late that night, I sat straight up in my bed, immediately and fully awake. The whole town was dark and still. I had been deep in a dreamless sleep. Nothing should have pulled me back to the waking world. But there was a faint scent in the air, burning coal. And then I sensed it. Her. I just knew it was her. She had followed me here somehow and now lurked outside my window, calling out to me. Come back. I didn't hear the words so much as feel them, reverberating in my head. I clamped my eyes shut and pulled the covers up over my face, like a child hiding from an imagined monster. She left me then. I felt it. Only instead of relief, I felt longing, like some part of me had gone with her. That scared me more than anything else so far. I drifted back to sleep eventually. I don't know how long it took, but I was still unsettled when I woke. I did my best at work that morning, despite my injuries and exhaustion, but it was slow going. My hip ached from where I'd fallen, and my head still throbbed. For some reason, my fingertips tingled like they were going numb. Thankfully, business was slow that time of day, so I didn't have to deal much with customers. I could just keep to myself and stock shelves. Or so I thought, until my manager found me in the frozen food aisle. I know you've been stealing, Whitaker. No, Save it. We've got security footage. Be grateful I'm not calling the cops. Get your things and go. But Go. Now. Before I change my mind about the cops. She towered over me, at least 7 feet tall, a gown of rags billowing out from her shoulders. Her eyes locked onto mine and I couldn't look away, and that's when I noticed she was shifting. Slowly, her features changed. She wasn't one thing, but many. Her eyes were light then dark, her hair short then long, then brown then blonde, her jaw lengthening then drawing back, and then her mouth stretched into a familiar grin. Rachel? I gasped. Rachel, and Megan, and Tara, and Clara, and Sophie, and on. Many names, many souls reside within us. But you killed them. No, we were willing, all of us. Suddenly her face was entirely Rachel's, mischievous grin and all, and my heart ached to have her back, my brave and unstoppable friend. You could be one of us. I shook my head. I can't. I'm not a witch. Nor were we. But then we were, and now you nearly are. I wanted to believe her. I should be running away, screaming for help, but I wanted to be here. How am I nearly? What do you mean? You are coming into your anger. Anger? You see the injustice around you, and you counter it. But you must be more. You must learn to control it if you wish to join us, to partake of our power. Did she mean Jason? When I'd punched him? But what do I do? You will know it when the time comes. Hold out your hand. I did as she said, and her long, bony fingers reached out toward my palm. She dropped something there. Something light but firm that I couldn't see in the dark. It's time for you to go. No, wait. You must make your choice. We will be waiting. Wait, Suddenly, I was no longer in the cave. There was bright light all around, blinding me to my surroundings. Then, screeching tires and the loud, long blare of a car horn, with a second joining it shortly after. I opened my eyes. I was in the middle of the main road in town, blocking traffic. The cars continued to honk as I waved a frantic apology and darted to the sidewalk, gasping for air. I stood stunned for a few moments, then noticed the position of the sun. It was late afternoon now, well after school had let out. I started toward home. I'd been walking for a few minutes when I finally remembered that the witch had given me something. It was still clutched tight in my fist. Slowly, I uncurled my fingers and looked down at my palm. It was a bone. I couldn't be sure, but from its size I guessed it was a human finger bone. I knew I should be repulsed, should hurl it away from myself and run home to scrub any residue from my hands. But I couldn't. I just stared, intrigued. I wondered if it had come from one of the witches' victims? That didn't seem like the right word anymore. Who had it come from? What was I supposed to do with it? Lost in my thoughts, I tripped over a crack in the sidewalk and stumbled, the bone nearly falling from my hand. I clutched it to my chest, horrified at the thought I might lose it. When I was sure it was secure again, I tucked it carefully into my pocket. I noticed then how cold it was, the November air biting at my exposed skin. I pulled my jacket tight around my body and hurried home. As soon as I walked in the door, I knew I'd messed up. The house was silent, but tense, like the walls were holding their breath. Megan sat in the dim light of the dining room, doing her homework. She offered me a weak smile, then whispered, "He's?" Our father emerged from the darkness at the end of the hallway, stumbling and reeking of whiskey. "You skipping school?" I didn't answer, just stared at my shoes. My mouth had gone dry, and I was frozen in place. "Answer me." I couldn't speak, but I did look up then, and locked eyes with him. I was so tired of being a punching bag. The eye contact seemed to enrage him further. He stepped closer, so the tip of his nose was inches from mine. "Got a call this morning that you never turned up. The fuck were you doing?" I winced at each word, as his sour breath puffed in my face. The words tumbled out of me before I could even think them. "None of your fucking business." He lurched back as though I'd hit him. I don't think he'd ever heard me speak that way before. His surprise didn't last long, though. He slapped me across the face, hard and fast, knocking me back into the wall. "Stop!" Megan shrieked from the dining room. He pulled his arm back to hit me again, but suddenly Megan was between us, holding her arms up in a protective gesture, and his hand swung down and caught her face instead of mine. Megan cried out as she hit the floor, curling into a ball and clutching her face where he'd struck her. Rage shot through me, and I felt a white-hot burning at my hip. Without thinking, I raised my hands and thrust them at my father. I never touched him. I wasn't even close. But that mere gesture lifted him off his feet and shoved him back through the doorway. A crash and a yelp of pain shot out from the dark. I saw him stand, coming back toward me, but then he stopped. The anger was gone from his face. Now it was heavy with fear. He shook his head like he was trying to clear something from it, then looked at me. His jaw quivered as he tried to think of something to say, but apparently nothing came to mind, because he walked back into the dark. I heard the back door swing open and then slam shut. I looked down at Megan, who had sat up but was still clutching at her face. "Are you okay?" She winced, but nodded. "Put some ice on it. I'll be back later." I snuck out the front door as quietly as I could and looked around. I saw him stumbling away from the house, too far away for me to catch up before he disappeared around a corner. That was okay, though. I knew where he was going. The neon lights on the liquor store provided the only illumination on the main road as the sky rapidly darkened. The street lights had long since gone out, and the few businesses that weren't boarded up had closed for the night. My father's shadowed form stumbled into the glow and shoved its way through the double doors. I approached, and the burning at my hip started again. I reached in and removed the bone, clutching it in my fist. I stopped when I was across the street from the glass front of the store. My father had made his way to the back wall, staring at the bottom row of whiskey, deciding. And there, crouched down in a nearby aisle and moving liquor bottles from a box to the shelf, was Jason. Good. More fuel. I thought about every blow my father had aimed at me, every insult and taunt Jason had ever spat at me. I thought about everyone, the police, the neighbors, the teachers, the classmates, who pretended they couldn't see. I let it course through me, building, burning, raging, fighting to get out. I thought about Megan, lying shocked and pained on the floor, and I screamed, and a deafening crash erupted from the store as every bottle and every can in the place burst at once, showering the two men with glass and metal shards. When the debris had settled, Jason lay groaning on the floor, blood oozing from 1,000 puncture wounds. My father stood behind him, dazed, staring at his shredded hands and arms in confusion as blood dripped down his face and into his eyes. He slapped me across the face, hard and fast, knocking me back into the wall. "Stop!" Megan shrieked from the dining room. He pulled his arm back to hit me again, but suddenly Megan was between us, holding her arms up in a protective gesture, and his hand swung down and caught her face instead of mine. Megan cried out as she hit the floor, curling into a ball and clutching her face where he'd struck her. Rage shot through me, and I felt a white-hot burning at my hip. Without thinking, I raised my hands and thrust them at my father. I never touched him. I wasn't even close. But that mere gesture lifted him off his feet and shoved him back through the doorway. A crash and a yelp of pain shot out from the dark. I saw him stand, coming back towards me, but then he stopped. The anger was gone from his face. Now it was heavy with fear. He shook his head like he was trying to clear something from it, then looked at me. His jaw quivered as he tried to think of something to say, but apparently nothing came to mind, because he walked back into the dark. I heard the back door swing open and then slammed shut. I looked down at Megan, who had sat up but was still clutching at her face. "Are you okay?" She winced, but nodded. "Put some ice on it. I'll be back later." I snuck out the front door quiet as I could and looked around. I saw him stumbling away from the house, too far away for me to catch up before he disappeared around a corner. That was okay, though. I knew where he was going. The neon lights on the liquor store provided the only illumination on the main road as the sky rapidly darkened. The street lights had long since gone out, and the few businesses that weren't boarded up had closed for the night. My father's shadowed form stumbled into the glow and shoved its way through the double doors. I approached, and the burning at my hips started again. I reached in and removed the bone, clutching it in my fist. I stopped when I was across the street from the glass front of the store. My father had made his way to the back wall, was staring at the bottom row of whiskey, deciding, and there, crouched down in a nearby aisle and moving liquor bottles from a box to the shelf, was Jason. Good. More fuel. I thought about every blow my father had aimed at me, every insult and taunt Jason had ever spat at me. I thought about everyone, the police, the neighbors, the teachers, the classmates, who pretended they couldn't see. I let it course through me, building, burning, raging, fighting to get out. I thought about Megan, lying shocked and pained on the floor, and I screamed, and a deafening crash erupted from the store as every bottle and every can in the place burst at once, showering the two men with glass and metal shards. When the debris had settled, Jason lay groaning on the floor, blood oozing from 1,000 puncture wounds. My father stood behind him, dazed, staring at his shredded hands and arms in confusion as blood dripped down his face and into his eyes. I raised my hands in front of me, palms up, bone resting on them, not yet knowing what I meant to do. And I remembered the night my mother didn't come home and that smirk. I searched the ground beneath us and found a vein of fire. I wrapped my fingers around the bone and thrust my hands upward. The ground beneath the store cracked open and roared, the stink of coal and ash permeating the air. The whole place went up at once in a column of flame, and by rights both men should be dead, but I could hear them screaming, and it filled me up and it warmed me like steaming mug of tea on a cold rainy morning, and it was good, and I laughed and laughed and laughed. I awoke in my bed just before dawn, with no memory of the intervening hours. My clothes were strewn all over the floor. I rose to search my room for confirmation of what I already knew. The bone was gone, but its power was still with me, pulsing in my veins, along with the power I had created. I showered and dressed and went downstairs. I watched the cold light of the blood-red sun seep through the trees. The whole town, it seemed, was blanketed with smoke and ash and shocked silence. Sometime later, I heard the floorboards creak as Megan rose and made her way downstairs. She stood behind me, quietly watching me watch the world. "He's dead, isn't he?" I couldn't see her face, but her voice revealed no emotion. I nodded once. And the explosion, that was... I nodded again. A long pause, then Megan said, "I'll make breakfast." We didn't have much. Some stale bread for toast and the remnants of a jar of off-brand jam. But Megan made it for us, and we ate it together at the dining room table, and Megan chattered away about school and books and recommendations, and I stayed quiet, trying to drink it all in, knowing, somehow, that this was the last time we'd eat together. I wondered how much of this I'd be able to take with me when it was all over. The Bardow Witch doesn't always come for her initiates right away. Sometimes it's days. But I could feel her eyes on me, knew she was just waiting for night to fall before she drew me to her for the last time. Before I knew it, Megan was standing and collecting our plates, taking them to the sink. I heard the water start to flow. "I'll do that," I told her. I stood to take over. "It's no problem. You should get to school. What about you? Don't worry about me." Megan started to argue. But she looked at me, and I think something in my eyes made her stop. She smiled, unsure of me. Okay, thanks. She packed up and hoisted her bag onto her shoulders. I gave her a quick, awkward hug. Take care of yourself, and don't let anyone push you around. She searched my face again, and I wondered what she saw there, because she started to back away. I won't. See you later. She turned and walked away from me. I love you, I whispered, but I think she heard me, because she turned to give me one last smile before she continued on down the road. I watched as she faded away, and then I started to wonder how I'd be found. What parts of me she'd take. I didn't much care, except I hoped it wouldn't be Megan who found me. Anyone but her. I hoped she would never have to see what was left. I washed the dishes, like I promised, dried them, and stacked them neatly away in the cabinets. I did this one last thing for her, before I left. An empty sink was what I could leave her, along with a pitiful bank account balance and a shitty old house. I hoped she could sell that heap for all it was worth and get out of Bardow, go to college, be one of the few who escaped and had a life worth living and never looked back. I would stay here, forever, making sure this town got what it deserved. Eventually, the sun started to sink, and I should have been scared, but I wasn't. I was the calmest I'd ever been. I walked away from the house, hoping to get far away from it before the witch found me, hoping I'd be torn up somewhere else. I didn't know if distance would make a difference, but I tried it anyhow. I found myself by the stream, where Rachel had turned up. I reached out for her, hoping some part of her was there, could tell me what to do, what to expect. What I found instead was energy, beneath my feet, the smoldering fire stretching out in 100 directions, and then, finally, I understood. Our witch was not the only one. I looked up and it was dark and very cold. The witch was there, on the other side of the stream, and for the first time that day I was scared. She held out a hand to me, still. I must choose to go with her. She wouldn't take me if I wouldn't go. I stepped back, thinking of Megan all alone. And then, that familiar grin. We'll get them, Bridget. We'll get them all. We'll take them by surprise. I couldn't help but smile back and reach out my hand in turn. For just a moment, a split second as I was ripped away from myself and scattered into pieces, I saw the witch for what she was, what we are. One of many, raging in the shadows, all connected by our shared fury, biding our time, hoarding our power. We are beneath you, all the time, watching, wondering, will you join us? Or will we strike you down in our righteous wrath? The choice is yours. We will be waiting.